Hi, it's Kamon Reynolds. This is going to be a pretty cool video, I think. We're going to inspect this triple deep colony over here. Now, they're just starting to, I believe, to draw in this top box over here. But I wanted to show you the pollen trap that's on this thing, and also just see the development, because if you were with us back in December, you may have watched the video where we saved this colony. I think it was the 20-odd of December, and this colony, I go into it, and she's just laying drones. So there's something wrong with the queen, she didn't get mated good, whatever it was, and it happens. Happens to us. You raise 100 queens, we don't expect 100 perfect queens. But we swapped the queens out, and, well, you're fixing to see the results because of that work. Now, before we get into the hive, let's check the pollen trap. So today they haven't been bringing near as much pollen because they've been bringing in nectar. Woohoo! So bees really prioritize their needs. So if they have a lot of bee bread and they need more fuel, nectar, whatever, then they're going to focus on that. And they were definitely bringing in pollen today, but not as much as they were the other day. So this right here is the, I'll show you both pieces here in a second. Ooh. So look at that wonderful pollen. Now look at those hive beetles. This pollen is very fresh, so now that this day is over, we need to get these beetles out of here, and we also need to freeze this pollen. Some people will dehydrate it, but we are going to freeze it. Dumb things. Now the cool thing is you can also use these trays for small hive beetles. See how many small hive beetles have been pushed down in here by the bees? Get out of here. So you could, when you're not doing the pollen, have a bunch of diatomaceous earth down here, or an oil trap. But I prefer the DE, let's call it, because it kills them a lot quicker, I think, and the oil always spills on me every time. So look at this gorgeous pollen right here, though. I've just got one more hive beetle, I think, to get out of here. All kinds of different colors. Now, 2 days ago, I got this pollen off of it, and it's been frozen off of this colony, and it is really delicious, very good for you. But we didn't really get much of the yellow, so something else is blooming right now. And you can see all this yellow in here. You can see all this like green gray. It is really interesting, the varieties of pollens, and this is why it's so easy for colonies to build up this time of the year. It's just because they have such a diverse and healthy diet from all of the different types of pollens that are coming in. So we are going to throw that in here and freeze that as well. Now, one thing that you must do whenever you're doing this is not leave it on. If you leave the pollen trap on constantly, you're going to starve your bees to death. So I like to keep them in my home yard, where I'm at, of course, and 1 day on, 1 day off. Now, during our dearth periods, where we don't hardly have any pollens come in, we're not going to use it at all. So for me, we're looking at probably part of March, April, May, and then possibly late August and September for a pollen trap use. And it's going to depend on colony strength. You definitely don't want to be pulling from little bitty colonies that are trying to build up. So let's show you this real quick, and then we'll get into the hive. So right here is our, I'm going to smoke the bees a little bit, kind of get them out of the way. We don't really want to catch a bunch that are in those holes going through this thing. Alright, so we have the Apame pollen trap insert, and what happens is as we put this all the way and slide it through here, it only grants access to the hive through these holes. The bees actually can fit through these, even though it seems rather small, and their pollen baskets will not, and therefore it will fall down into this tray and give us this delicious pollen, which goes for quite an expensive price, and especially in big cities. I love it in yogurt and honey. It is absolutely delicious, and it is very good. I might just start eating this. It's said to be by some a superfood and all that kind of stuff, and I would agree. Between that and honey, this definitely would have more macro and micro minerals and vitamins and all that kind of stuff. But you have this insert here. Don't leave it in. But that's how the pollen is raked off of the bees' legs. And this is very important as well. When you're done, this has got to slide in its place so that your bees don't start using this as a entrance. because let me tell you, it only takes a handful of days. You get some new bees that are going on their first orientation flights, and they find the first exit they come to. And it could be on that end, could be on this end, and you know, you could have 1,000 bees within a week or so just using this entrance all the time, and then it can be a little bit of a pain in the honey. So let's get into this hive and see what's going on. Move all this stuff over here. Alright, but you see how, for whatever reason, the queen was a drone layer. We switched her up with one that we had in a little bitty nucleus colony, and now it's just growing right along. That's what beekeeping's all about. So there's the Apame lid right there. I was really impressed though, and by the way, if you want to know where I got the Apame trap from, I'm going to leave it in the comments below. That's one thing I was really curious about, to see if the pollen trap would work really well. And I really feel like for the price and the other options that you're able to get, it actually was a pretty good deal. And it's easy to clean up all of this stuff too. If it gets really dirty, you can just, you know, take it inside and wash her on up just like you would a, you know, Rubbermaid dish or something like that. Alright, so this top box, a bunch of new frames, and some people have asked me about the Man Lake frames that I purchased. I have not coated them again, but keep in mind, this colony is wanting to build up because of all the proteins and diversity coming in, and there's nectar finally starting to come in. So you can see where they've just started a little bit over here. You can see a bunch on that black foundation much better. And it's just a very thin coat. Now, I don't think that the plastic foundation that comes with these frames is as good as some of the other companies. It's not as thick, but it definitely is accepted by the bees and used and drawn very well, as long as the bees are in expansion mode and ready to use it. Any foundation is going to work poorly for you, whether it's wax foundation or plastic foundation, if the bees are not ready to draw it and they just sit around for weeks around that stuff, and they're just going to pick that wax right off. I don't know why they do it, but they're pickers. And then you're down to plastic and you're like, what in the world? Or they only pick half of it off, and then when they do start drawing, you get a weird looking frame. Now, it doesn't mean they always get this perfectly, but there's not a whole lot up in this box. We have a frame right here that has brood in it. That encouraged them to come up and start drawing that. So let's move on. Smoke those bees a little bit. And now we have some nice new combs up here. Not all of this is drawn, but we're going to kind of see what's going on over here. You know, just wonderful new combs. You can see as they're expanding out. This is really nice. Put that over there. Now, some people have asked about excluders a lot, and this is a great time to address that. So, as you can see, the bees have committed to starting to draw a little bit in the third box. They definitely have committed to drawing a good bit in the second box. And if you wanted to have the queen in this bottom box with an excluder, you could do that now. But if you had her hemmed away down in the bottom and you just threw some foundations on top, that's a recipe for disaster, because bees really don't look at foundation as expansion. They don't look at it as comb. So bringing up combs into the second box, even letting her lay a little bit, is okay. Let her come up in there with the rest of the bees. Even better, entice her up with a frame of eggs or larvae, which will soon, the eggs will soon be larvae. And once she starts getting up there, the bees are going to follow her up, and as long as there's sugar syrup coming in or nectar, they're going to draw that out. So look at all this wonderful brood. They're just starting to cap right here. But once you get to this stage where they are committed to drawing foundation in the second or third box, you can put her below in that bottom box and put the excluder on. But if you do it before then, you're asking for trouble. Just some gorgeous frames of brood right here. You can see the nectar slash sugar syrup. This is not a honey production colony. We don't plan on any honey production from this colony this year. And the reason it's behind so much is just due to the fact that it was a drone layer in December. It really shrank the population down. Plus we're making them draw foundation, which takes a lot of work, a lot of honey and nectar. We will split this colony in half, maybe more than that actually. Alright, so we have some decent capped brood over here. There's a lot of nectar in between the brood a little bit, but no big deal. Another good side of a brood over here, lots of pollen and nectar. And this is what you really want to see in ideal conditions. You know, you get some frames that are really solid, which is great, but you always would like to see either sugar syrup or honey up above the brood, pollen as well. They want that resource close. Honey is great, but that fresh stuff is what the bees truly desire. Alright, let's see if we can find her. Oh, and there we have it. You know, and I didn't bring an excluder for this, but I wish I would have. It would have been great. We're going to go ahead and move her on down here in just a little bit. Actually, let me go grab that. Well, Laurel got the excluder for me, so that was really nice of her. So now we can complete this video. We have the queen over here. She hopped over on another frame. I told you wrong earlier. We actually have requeened this hive twice. Got to looking at her a little bit more. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not the original queen, because this is from the Italian line and not the Carney. Not that they, sometimes they can look very similar if you have well, bees like mine that are constantly interbreeding. And, you know, plus I have a lot of neighbors that have Italians, so it's hard to keep the solid Carney look. But anyways, we requeened again because I was seeing signs of European foul brood in here, and honestly it might have not been the queen. There was a lot of stress going on. One, because this colony was super out of balance due to, you know, being in a drone laying condition. It was in winter. Then on top of that, we've had a pretty rough spring. A lot of people have in this part of the country, and really wet, abnormally cold. It makes it really hard. And sometimes you'll have European foul brood, and it's not the fault of the queen. It's just there's not enough nurse bees to take care of the larvae enough. Or the weather can be just extremely drastic. And the bees sometimes are at that position where they make a gamble. Your really strong colonies, usually you don't see a whole lot unless it's very, very extreme. But those colonies that are kind of in between, that are trying to take that next step, if they are getting some warm weather and they're like, all right, we're in expansion mode, but then it's a little bit too much if it drops down in the 20s and 30s again, then you can have some European foul brood and other types of stress signs because the bees just don't have enough nurse bees and bee coverage to manage things. Nutrition also was impacted a lot during those times because of the frost killing many of our pollen producing plants. And the nectar wasn't coming in like usual. So this colony has been requeened twice. However, instead of having no colony here, she's doing excellent. There's a lot of brood down in the bottom box. I can see multiple frames of capped brood down there, but queens have a tendency to go up with the heat. And many times this bottom box will end up being pretty empty, and you'll have all kinds of brood in the second or third boxes if left to their own devices. This is going to be much handier for us, and actually the bees, even though they don't know it, because all the brood will be in one location after a while. It'll be easier for the nurse bees to really micromanage that. And then for us, it'll be much easier for splits, looking for swarm cells, treatments, anything, finding the queen. It really keeps it consolidated. The longer I keep bees, the more I have an appreciation for the Queen Excluder. A lot of people hate them, but I think that's just because there's a few tricks that you gotta know to be able to use them correctly. And I'm not saying that you have to use Queen Excluders. Some people say that they're honey excluders as well. I have not found that to be the case at all. You can always have an upper entrance, which I recommend, and that way your drones can get out if there's any up above, and the bees can bypass going through the bottom and take the honey straight to the honey supers if necessary. So one thing that I did is I pulled this frame out of the bottom and it is just full of young larvae. I'm going to shake this so you can see it a little bit better. Ooh, there's some nectar coming out of there too. Very nice. Alright, so they're fixing to cap some of this. And I'm going to switch it over to the next side. This is a good frame to place up against one of our frames of foundation that have not been drawn yet or are partially drawn. This forces the bees to pay more attention in that area because they have to keep this brood warm and fed. So they have just started a little bit on this foundation over here. Just a tiny bit. Yeah, just a little bit of wax on that. So this is a perfect place to stick this frame of brood right here. And also, it's a good frame to get away from the queen as well, because it's going to be a long time before those cells are available for the queen to lay in. It's better to leave capped brood down there with her, because it's going to be much quicker for that to turn over and to free up space for that queen to lay. Now that the nectar's flowing, we have to watch out for swarming just a little bit more. So we have more larvae, a little bit of capped brood, so it's fixing to be capped pretty soon. Still a ways to go before it emerges from the cell. Just a gorgeous frame right here. You gotta love new comb. I always want to have new comb every year. And you know, this one right here looks really old. Gauging by the staples and the type of frame that it is, I'm going to say this comb is 3 years old at the max. It's still in its prime. Great brood comb. You know, not for honey production, but this has still got plenty of life left in it. Alright, now this one right here, it's mostly drawn. We're going to move this. I like to keep the brood together. Just a good idea, especially if we get some cold nights. You want it to be easy for the bees to be able to keep that brood cool. Alright, this frame's got some brood on too. Let's check that one out over there. I really need to use some smoke. It's getting late in the evening. The bees are getting a little testy. They especially love it when you bang the smoker on the side of the hive box. Absolutely love that. Wow, that's what you really want to see. Just lots of nurse bees on this one. Check that out where they're using a little bit of old wax up here. You know, like, why is that, Kamon? We don't fully understand how much and why and when the bees reuse wax, but they will to a degree. And you can't just sit out tons of wax and they just bring it all back in. There's got to be certain conditions that are met, and if anyone knows of any good research on this, I would love to see it. But the reason that it's so dark is because they're swiping wax off of this frame over here. Just a little bit. It might not be very much. Let's check out what's going on up here. Is there anything in there, Laurel? Yeah. There's a little bit of a cell going there. Very interesting. But you can see how there's a little royal jelly down in there, but they didn't continue with that. A lot of people have asked me if the queen designates when they should start to swarm, or when she should lay in that, or the bees move the eggs. I don't know 100% on all that, but what I feel is, especially during times of the year when the bees want to swarm, the poor queen's just looking for a spot to lay. And I think a lot of times she'll just come across any old spot and she'll lay in it. I do think that the bees also will bully her into laying into queen cups, especially super seeger cells as well, and encourage her to lay down in there. I don't know to what extent all the roles of that go into it, but I really think that sometimes the queen she lays in one of those, and you know, some of the bees are like, all right, let's start raising a queen over here, and then the rest of them are like, whoa, now we're not doing that right now. The rest of us aren't on board with that. So sometimes I think that goes on. This is a really nice frame of brood, so we're going to scoot this one over as well. Love all this beautiful comb. Thing of it is, the nectar flow has started, so we've backed off feeding this colony. But if it were to stop, we would need to commence feeding, or the rest of this would not get drawn and they'd pick the wax off the foundation. Alright, just a frame of food right here. So I'm going to go ahead and scoot this one over It's only partially drawn on this side, so we're going to put that over here with the next one. And now we're going to take this one that is also partially drawn, and we are going to take the side that has the most drawn on it, and we're going to stick that up against this one. And this one is just partially drawn. And then we are going to stick that against this one, which has not yet been started. And that is the best way to do it. Sometimes you can't help it, but it's best to kind of not have a fully drawn comb going up against the foundation if you can do something like this instead. They tend to draw it better. But yes, the nectar is finally coming in here in Tennessee, but it's finally got back to what it's supposed to. It's been in the 80s the last couple days. You know, this time last week we were in our long underwear. It's just unbelievable. But 80s is where we typically are this time of the year. You know, if we drop down in the low 70s, we're like, ooh, nice, a little break from the heat. You know, honestly, we haven't had a day in the 90s yet, and many years we're already in the 90s at least once or twice at this point. So, anyways, you can kind of see what we did there. We got the Queen Excluder now. Queens locked down below. They will continue to draw this. They've already committed to that. Don't put your Queen Excluder on too quickly, though, because that can really encourage swarming, because what will happen is they won't come up here and draw. All of that nectar that they're bringing in, or what you're feeding, is going to still be coming in, and the only combs that they're going to have are down here, and it's going to be nectar, pollen, and the queen laying all vying for that bottom spot, that bottom box. And all it takes is a little bit of backfilling. It doesn't matter if the hive is 3 frames or 30 frames. Congested brood nest is the best way to have your bees hit the trees. So we're just going to throw all this back together. We're going to harvest this wonderful pollen over here, and I'm going to probably have some for breakfast. And if I start, you know, looking, you know, like a bodybuilder because of all the protein and stuff, well, wouldn't that be nice? Probably not. Anyways, all I'm going to do with this pollen is throw it in a baggie and then freeze it. And a lot of people just sell it to their customers just like that. Me personally, what I'm going to be doing with a lot of this is either eating it or mixing it into the pollen patties that I'm feeding my queen rearing colonies to give the optimal nutrition possible for those new queens that we're making for our operation. Pretty awesome. So if you want to know where you can get a pollen trap like that for, I think, a reasonable price for all the things that it can do, I'm going to leave that in the comments below. Thanks for watching our videos, and if you have any questions on what you just saw here, leave them below.